Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Erik Davis, continuing our conversations about the cultures of consciousness. You know, it's really quite incredible how rapidly things are changing in the world of psychoactive drugs in terms of discourse, in terms of institutional interests, in terms of narratives, and even in terms of the law. Weed legalization was a very, very long time coming. Lots of battles along the way, and it's still a very leaky boat. Here in California, there's ongoing problems with it. I think some of the negative features of the law have become more obvious in terms of the way that it weights big players. And this has led to some paradoxical situations. For example, right now, there's some pushback by local communities against the state because while the state of California gave local communities the right to regulate the sale of recreational marijuana and medical in terms of the locations, they did insist that weed was still available by delivery. And so some communities have pushed back against the state, against saying this is not with the spirit of the law, which is to give local communities control over the availability of weed. And of course, most of these communities are conservative ones that want no weed. But peculiarly, some of these communities, including Santa Barbara County, as far as I understand it, I might have the details wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's Santa Barbara County, have joined with these conservative communities against the state because they found that by not being able to regulate the delivery of weed, they were their own local players were being pushed out of the business, and instead you had these larger, not conglomerates is too big a word, but let's call them larger entities coming in and kind of manhandling the field. So in order to maintain their own local control, including their support of local businesses, they sort of paradoxically joined with the conservative communities that want to have nothing to do with legal cannabis. So that's the kind of confusions that lie ahead in the world of certainly of legalization. But another thing is been happening and rather rapidly, which is the growing conversation about the decriminalization. Notice the difference. We'll talk about that later. Of psilocybin mushrooms. Why exactly mushrooms got the pass? That'll be something we're going to talk about today with our guests. But I think basically as we speak, the city of Denver is deciding, or at least I think some mail-in ballots started to go out earlier this week. I'm not sure exactly when their vote is, but they're voting on whether to decriminalize psilocybin mushrooms within the city of Denver. And next year, Oregon's going to have a proposition on the ballot that's a statewide proposition, and people will again be voting on. It's a little more complicated. It's decriminalization, but it also involves some ability of licensed practitioners to use it in a therapeutic situation. Again, we'll find out more details about these conversations here, but very happy to say that another measure is going on in my own backyard in the lovely burb of Oakland, where so much of what's interesting in the Bay Area now is happening, in my view. And this is being spearheaded by a local group that I've had the good pleasure of spending some time hanging out with and getting to know, which is the group Erik, exploring the Entheogenic Research Integration and Education Crew. I always forget what it stands for because Erik is such a cool name for a psychedelic organization, because psychedelics are powerful and sacred and loving and transforming, but they can be a little eerie too, so I like that. And I've spent some time with Larry Norris, who's the head honcho at the moment and is helping to drive this Decriminalize Oakland resolution. So I asked him and one of his comrades, Kufikiri, on to talk about the resolution and the issues it raises, and talk a little bit more about what it means to decriminalize these plants that so many of us have been in relationship to for a very long time, but always under the dark cloud illegality. So with no further ado, thanks, guys, for joining me on Expanding Mind.
Thank you very much, Eric, for having us on.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. So yeah, just tell me about how this started. I mean, how it seems to have come up pretty quickly, and were you inspired by some of these other movements or initiatives that were happening in Denver and Oregon? Was it something independent? Where did you really first get the idea, like, hey, we could actually do this here?
Yeah, it's actually a kind of a great story. We all met together for a different project in the middle of December, and we're looking at building a few different community organizations that deal with expanding consciousness and plants and studying the plants and that type of thing. And we had a roundtable of about 15 different people. And somewhere along the way, somebody had said, hey, there's this thing happening in Denver, there's this thing happening in Oregon. And we kind of debated a little bit about the two different proposals. And, just like you're saying there, like there was at one point in time, somebody said, well, why are these guys always ahead of California? This seems backwards. Why can't we do this? And we just happened to have the right people in the room at the right time to really be able to engage in a deeper conversation almost immediately. And, we only just met in mid-December as the team as well. And it's not, Erie is one portion of it, but the Haven, Sacred Garden Community, Psychedelics Society, et cetera. There's a bunch of different groups that are helping out here, so it's a pretty beautiful group of people that are coming together on this. And we just kind of started. We decided, okay, well, let's do this, and we put together a resolution. And once we had the resolution, we got a significant amount of feedback from quite a few different people, probably about 30, 40 different people to kind of offer suggestions and feedback. So it's really a community grown resolution as well. And then since then, we've just been kind of chipping away at the tasks that we need to do. Our project is to go through the Oakland City Council, and maybe I'll update you a little bit more on where we're at in that process. But that's just kind of how we started off. And then Kufikiri kind of came along as well, and we've been offering insights to the City Council. So we've all been meeting the City Council members and the community members and things like that. We had a really excellent event that happened on March 22nd. We had about 175, maybe 180 people show up for the event, which is pretty great. Had about 8 different community tables, different organizations, different speakers. And it was just really beautiful to see everyone come together with the same idea in mind, decriminalize nature, change our relationship to nature.
Yeah, there's a number of things I wanted to ask you about. I mean, one is that you in comparison to these other initiatives, you've made the more audacious move to move beyond psilocybin mushrooms alone and to embrace all entheogenic plants. And it's a real interesting kind of move to say, no, we're not talking about psychedelics, we're not talking about all drugs, we're talking about entheogenic plants that have been part of the human pharmacopoeia for millennia, that have in addition shown their benefits in a variety of ways. But of course that does sort of make it more complicated or a harder sell. And then behind that question, like why you decided to go for the gold, so to speak, on that one, is just why it is that psilocybin mushrooms were the entheogenic plants that were first taken up by these other initiatives, as opposed to ayahuasca or peyote, both of which have, unlike mushrooms, have some sort of legal umbrella in certain circumstances with religious groups. So first, the question is, why do you think it was psilocybin mushrooms that these other initiatives focused on? And then the second part, and either you can address this, is why did you make the move to say, hey, let's take this, let's envision this on a bigger level?
Yeah, so I think the first question would be why psilocybin is getting so much popularity right now, and I think that a couple of different reasons. First and foremost, I think that's just where the research is right now. So, all the studies you're seeing in the news, the Johns Hopkins studies, the Beckley Research Institute studies, from Imperial College, the NYU studies, they're all focusing on psilocybin. So that definitely is probably why there's more research in this area. We can kind of focus on that. On the other side of it too, is it seems like there's more capital behind that as well. And I'm not saying that either of these different initiatives were sort of motivated by capital, but Compass Pathways is, I think Compass Pathways, Compass creating the synthetic psilocybin structure, and they have the FDA trials passed. So that's also something that's kind of in the vicinity. But I was reading somewhere it costs like $7,000 to $10,000 for a gram of the synthetic made psilocybin. And I also just read recently that there's another company from China that's looking into synthetic made psilocybin. So one of the things that we're also thinking about is just wanting to sort of get ahead of the decrease in accessibility that might happen with some of these synthetic compounds when you can grow something out of your ground and have it, free, natural, and accessible to many different people.
Yeah, it's really interesting the way like an initiative like yours is simultaneously practical and even sort of utopian in the sense of like the possibility of really changing at least one urban area's relationship with these things and allowing a lot of things to go down. But it's also symbolic in the sense that it's moving into this very rapidly changing, very dynamic and definitely increasingly capitalized zone of psychedelic consciousness and plant medicines and using them again as medicines. And it was again interesting, and I think you're right that it's not just that there's a lot of research with psilocybin and it's been used in a lot of the more recent studies in Johns Hopkins, etc. That's obviously a significant reason and probably the main one. But the fact that it's also something that's interesting to capital is already moving in there, makes it more visible in a way that ayahuasca and peyote are both still, a little weird, a little marginal, a little like the others. It's associated with the others, with, Native Americans, with, people in the South. And even though there's religious exemptions associated with both those plants in the United States, there's something about the science and the capital that make psilocybin mushrooms more visible. So I really appreciate the way that your initiative goes in there and says, yes, psilocybin mushrooms are great, but they're part of a larger and in some ways more important class, which is plants. Plants that can be used as medicine plants and that have a history of use as medicine plants. And that aspect of it, the nature aspect of it is very noticeable in the language of the initiative and in your presentation of it. And maybe someone, and I'm curious about that decision because I think someone else sitting there who wanted to get the same decriminalization to happen might go, let's hold back on the nature stuff. We don't want them to think we're just long-haired hippie freaks. Like, let's just stress the science and the healing. And you do stress the science and the healing, but you also very much stress the nature aspect of psychedelic experience and the fact that these things are plants. Was that always obvious? Was there discussion around that? How did that come to be?
Yeah, thank you, Erik. And again, thank you for having us on the show so we can help spread the message here that's so vital and important. And to that point, broadening the focus with this initiative, a big key of it is with the focus, the holistic approach around community. I think if you see where this issue is with where it relates to Oakland, the diversity and the depth of the community in Oakland is something that we really want to acknowledge and make room for as it relates to access. How that relates to other cities in Oregon and in Colorado, that might be something that's not necessarily on their radar. As far as the makeup of their communities there. But it was something for us that we were very focused on and not wanting to fracture, not wanting to seem to divide. So as well as it focuses on the nature and the plants and where it looks at politically, it's more advantageous to take the bigger approach now politically. And it also has its benefits in wanting to build bridges and unite the various communities here in Oakland.
Oh, I never really even thought about that. That's amazing. Let me just make sure I'm getting it right. Is that I asked a question about like why take in all these different plants rather than just focus on psilocybin like these other initiatives are doing. And what I'm hearing, and I thought, okay, because you want to get more of the plants in there. You want to like make more of a statement that we're talking about a whole realm of nature here. And you're saying, yeah, that's part of it. But part of it is also, it's about community, and it's about the fact that by broadening the basket, increasing the basket, you're getting more people interested, more different communities who have different kinds of investments, and then that transforms the initiative into something that's more collectively meaningful than just isolating one particular thing that's interested to a certain set of communities. I'd never really thought about that.
Yeah, that's definitely been something that has been really a big part of our Oakland initiative, is just like bringing communities together and not wanting to fragment or fracture them. And the nature conversation is obviously a huge part of this. And then also it's joining our connecting communities, and because this is a big project we're trying to do. We would love to go beyond Oakland at some point in time, and we're going to need all different communities to feel like they're connected to this and doing all the hard work that needs to be done in order, because a big part of this, unlike other initiatives, and maybe like other initiatives, but one thing that we're really focusing on in Oakland is the long-term plan, which means that our basic work starts when the policy shifts. And that's education. That's, empowering people through facilitation and training workshops, or finding ways to get communities involved. So for us, our work kind of starts now versus maybe ending at the policy,
Yeah, and why was Oakland? And I don't know. Either of you can take it. I'm not sure who's best for this, but why was Oakland chosen in a sense? I mean, I know you live there, or at least in the East Bay. But was it a sense that Oakland was the right place for this? For what reason?
Yeah, I would think it was kind of just sort of serendipitous. We probably would have had. Berkeley might have also been an option because of the route we're going. So we're going through the city council. So we're looking for votes from the city council members. But I think first and foremost, we had the meeting in Oakland. We have one of our main Decriminalize Nature Oakland co-founders has been working in the Oakland City building for a long time. He's not anymore, but he was for a while. So he has some pretty nice connections and knows some people, and might be able to arrange some meetings in a more quick way than maybe I could by myself, or as a community. So that's also a big part of it. And I think there's something probably for all of us that feels like, this is the kind of thing that Oakland should be leading the conversation. And, this is something where, Oakland is, not San Francisco. It's not Berkeley. It's its own beautiful thing. And it's really awesome to see it evolving out of here, because it brings all these communities together, and it shows us how strong this community is underneath the underground, Well, and we're maybe not seeing that in other places.
No, again, I mean, I see it as it's like the symbolic power of it, in addition to what's actually happening on the ground with the measure and with the communities that are coming together and having to do the hard politics of it. But just the vision of it is much more powerful than if it was San Francisco or Berkeley, in my opinion, because of Oakland's particular character and because of the multiple communities that are going to have to be part of it in order for it to work. But I'm curious, like Kufikiri, how did you hear about this? Like, what did you hear? How did you hear about it, and why did it strike you like, oh yeah, this is what I want to put my energy into?
Yeah, actually, it's in the way that it came to Oakland was very, I think, has a serendipitous nature to it, and that's also in how I came to work with the initiative as well. I'm a Oakland native, born and raised, and so I know the Oakland kind of before its most recent iteration, so I've seen it go through a lot of transitions, and in my own personal journey and experiences working in ceremony, working with entheogens and working with sacred plants, and seeing the powerful transformative experiences that people have had to be able to change the narrative around their own lives. Once I heard after spending some time living in New York and returning to Oakland and wanting to connect to the community out here, seeing where this initiative was coming into fruition, and understanding with my own connection to the city, the benefit that it serves in the character of the city, the history of the city, the present moment of the city, the diversity, the depth of the city, and really all those elements just again in a serendipitous way have come together and really unfolded into this moment that we're navigating right now, and very excited about it.
I was really interested to hear that not only were you born locally, but your parents were born. I'm a old California too, and I always light up when oh wow, when people are here, people's families have been here for a while. Your parents were both born out here, and they participated in the civil rights and Black Power movements, which were so powerful, such an important part of Bay Area history. Do you see, how do you see this particular, whether you want to think about it as a human right or a liberation of the plants, but how do you see this sort of the legal fight over, and in some sense the symbolic fight over the meaning of these plants in terms of this longer legacy of social justice work that your family's been a part of and you've been a part of in your personal life?
That the legacy and the lessons handed down to me from my parents and themselves, born in the 50s in San Francisco. So they came of age in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, during the height of the civil rights and Black Power movement. So that awareness that was very informative in how I grew up and my perception of my immediate environment, but the larger social structure of things. And so with this, there is an opportunity for a reclaiming, if you will, in a way. And I don't say that in regards to any particular community. I feel like it's more in a humanitarian sense of where we're reclaiming nature, which is why I think the fact that we're saying decriminalize nature, because nature is something that should be accessible and available for everyone. And so some of the initiatives that we're seeing out there that are more isolated around maybe a particular compound or particular plant in general are taking routes where access is not being considered in a holistic approach, like what we're doing with this legal initiative here. And oftentimes that is the first door you need to knock on in these type of struggles to help lay the groundwork while you're working on other initiatives is where you're educating, informing, engaging in the community. And this all goes hand in hand.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's funny as you're talking, I'm realizing again, the way that your own sort of not unconscious, but ways that I was framing this issue in ways that were invisible to me. For example, I hadn't really again made that connection between underlining the role of nature, meaning these things are natural, they grow. You can grow them, or they can be grown, by people like you. They don't have to be manufactured. They have to go through industrial process. That idea is also directly linked to an idea of access, to the idea that these should be available to people simply by virtue of being human beings on a planet where these things grow. And that's an issue of access. And when you just say, hey, we want psilocybin mushrooms to be legal, that's great, or to be decriminalized, that's great, more power to them. But in the framing of that, there's no sense of hey, there's a reason that we should be able to have these accessible. And by the way, everyone is in that category, not just people who can afford it or people who are in the inside or people who have the right connections. So yeah, that I can see the way that this really is a kind of appropriately multidimensional initiation.
Yeah, definitely. And it's understandable when you're using certain vehicles, if you will, to introduce something that's maybe has a stigma around it, and you want it to have the broadest access available, that you look for the biggest door as far as mainstream emergence, which is also a moment that the psychedelic community is in. And so science and medicine are the ways to combat that in a larger narrative, where you have companies like Compass and what MAPS is doing to want to, again, change that narrative for the larger social conversation. Though when you use older language, older narratives, you also fold in those type of blind spots.
Yeah.
where you're not necessarily bringing everyone into that conversation.
Well, let me ask you something about this. This is maybe a little bit of an odd question, but it just popped up in my brain, and I tend to let them loose. And which is, you're using the word entheogen, and you're using it for very good reasons. Personally, I mean, I'm a historian of this stuff, and I have my reasons for tending towards psychedelic, but we don't have to get into that. But what I was sort of wondering is whether psychedelic, to me, if you look at psychedelic history, has a very white valence. Not that there weren't people of color who were using psychedelics in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and whatever. They're important, they're part of the picture, but there's very much a kind of white overstory to it in my sense of the history, and even in terms of who was taking it the most intensely, or who were making as big a deal out of it. But when you come to entheogen, one of the reasons that people start to use the term entheogen is to break the hold of the associations with psychedelic, which were legal, which were political, which had to do with the 60s, which had to do with Timothy Leary, and to say, look, there's a lot of things that are being stained by this term that really deserve a different, linguistic operation. Let's let something fresh in. It tends to be emphasis on the plants, so not necessarily, but also one that tries to break that connection with the 60s counterculture. And my question, sort of a roundabout way to ask the question, my question is whether entheogenic plants as a zone of thinking about it itself, it already has more access than psychedelic did, if you will. That the very reframing of it allows more room for new stories, new communities to come up with their own relationships in their own terms with this whole world than the earlier kind of psychedelic model of these powerful agents.
Yeah, and I think that was it was funny because obviously Erie starts off with entheogen. So I was actually one of the people at the beginning that was like, oh, I'm not so sure, because it's a word that, is people have a lot of, don't really know what it means, and, maybe have some trouble pronouncing it. And is this something that we were going to want to do? And we really came across, a lot of different things. One of which is that, also just speaking to Oakland in general, and Oakland is, having to have dealt with psychedelic San Francisco for a while. So to not want to use terms that, take people right to that spot. And the nice thing about entheogen, outside of, like you're saying, this multicultural dimension to it too, it gives us a fresh palette. 50%, 75% of the people that we're talking to don't know what entheogen is. So it gives us an opportunity to describe it in a new way. And I think that's so valuable right now, because we're dealing with trying to break through all this stigma, to give us a fresh start, like you said, and to have that conversation from there. Then people are more open to be like, oh, wow, these are healing plants in these types of ways. And they're listening to that in a different way.
Yeah. Kufikiri, do you have something to say about that? I mean, I still feel like, I really want to know more about how these plants and substances show up as possibilities in communities of color, particularly in terms of the way in which they may have associations that are left over from the 60s that aren't always that inviting. And so I don't know whether your own story or just your observation is and it seems like a really important part of the Oakland piece of this initiative.
Yeah, and I think that again, in the kind of the serendipity of the moment that this is taking place in Oakland, which is next door neighbors to San Francisco and Berkeley, which have strong histories with the psychedelic community and the way it has evolved over the past decades, and where we now understand from the political perspective that the war on drugs was a war on communities. So there was a very proactive effort from that political standpoint to create a larger national social narrative around what these were and how they were labeled as drugs, which has a negative connotation, and then psychedelics attached right to that, psychedelic drugs, that formed a perspective around it for different ethnically diverse communities, so that you have communities that are marginalized from a racial and ethnic standpoint that don't understand the story beyond what they've been told of recent from that political narrative, and seeing that psychedelic drugs as a term automatically, if there's an association that's a white person's, frame of reference. That's their choice of, drug or whatever you want to call it, when using those words. So for us to create an opportunity, like Larry was saying, to reframe that narrative and actually create a broader perspective of how these entheogens, sacred plants, sacrament to for some people, come from indigenous communities outside of the U.S. And what people are actually doing in these ethnically diverse and racially marginalized communities is actually reclaiming something that they didn't even know maybe belonged to their own history and legacy in the first place.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thing. It's like a symbolic leap, that by emphasizing the way that these have roots, literal roots in, non-white communities and indigenous communities and communities that have been here, for a very long time, that allows people to think about them as being part of their own stories and part of their own lives, in a way that, again, the psychedelic story doesn't, in most ways. And so, again, the symbolic effort of doing this, and it's kind of interesting in a way. You're the one feature of the initiative in Oakland is just kind of announcing that these opportunities are out there. It's like, what are these guys doing? Oh, wow, really? Oh, okay. It's like another way to kind of spread the word to broader communities, especially given all of the social health crises, the mental health crises, all of the problems with addiction. And, we can go on and on about the ways in which some of the health benefits, mental health benefits that come along with these things, obviously there's great need in Oakland, as there is everywhere. So that's very interesting. But in terms of the other groups that have been pulled in, I'd like to hear more about some of the more unusual partners, or partners that have been particularly proactive or turned on by this possibility, some of the other groups that have been part of this collective effort.
Yeah, so directly are you meaning sort of within the Oakland community, or do you come across the US? Okay, yeah. So we kind of started off, it was communities, Sacred Garden community, the Haven community, Erie, Psychedelic Society, SF came along the way. And so we've been kind of the core, Katie Stone, who's been working with SSDP forever. We've been kind of the core group putting a lot of these things together. And then our outreach for our tables and things like that have been great for our first event. But now sort of the next step is we're going to be needing to bring education to churches, to the Oakland Police Department, writing, field memorandums, to, La Clinique and Native American Health Center, and these types of groups that are throughout, that we think that we'll have a great time connecting with and sort of informing both ourselves and hearing from them on what their perspectives are. And so as we sort of continue to move forward, we're going to continue to sort of bring in more groups and connect with more groups and communities. But right now we probably have about 4 or 5 different communities that are in organizations that are coming together to make this happen. But a lot of us, for example, Erie is not technically, we're involved in the educational project, but as a 501c3, we can't do policy work. So when we do the policy stuff, I'm working by myself as someone who works with Erie, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's something too that people are being a little cautious of. We're working independently with a lot of the city council members, and we're having conversations, but we have our organization's support behind us.
So what exactly is the process you're doing? Like, I'm not really familiar with, a resolution and how things work on a city level. We don't really think about that so much. At least I don't. So what's actually the process? What's the goal you're getting to? And, would you be gathering all these other communities beforehand, or, how's it actually look on the calendar, so to speak?
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of like everything is happening in parallel, because in order for council members to feel, we might convince a council member, but we also have to convince the council member's constituents, or we're not going to have a council member that's going to be able to vote for us because, their constituents might not be aware of what we're doing. So it's kind of happening both at the same time. This project is both, directly one-on-one contact with the council members and a broader educational thing so that there won't be any complaints to the council members that would make them want to change their vote. As of now, the way we've been doing it is we've been meeting with council members. We also met with state representatives and from Assembly and Senate, and they seem supportive as well, and going to be open to see what Oakland's doing. We've had about 4 meetings with different council members. One, like you're saying, was suggesting we do due diligence and speak to the community members, the churches, the local market fairs, the police department, these types of things. We have now a sponsorship. So last Friday, we met with one of the council members, Noel Gallo, and he is open to sponsoring the resolution. So what that means is he's going to set the date for the Oakland City Council vote. He's going to bring it to the floor, and he's going to put his name on the legislation. We also have favorable support from the council president, from the Oakland City Council president, and a possible co-sponsor as well from another one of the council members. So we're hoping to bring that to the floor in May and have a vote in May. And then what we would need is there are 8 city council members. I believe we need 5 of 8 in order for it to pass. Our goal is to have a unanimous decision and to talk to everybody and share with them about the importance of the plants and have an 8 for 8 vote.
So that means that educational push is like happening now and has to happen kind of fast, because if you're doing it in May, you got to make sure that the communities are behind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay. So how does that look like? That sounds like a lot of, that's not easy. There's so many. Where do you start?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic, and I think it's a unique challenge that we're excited about. In that, part of what we're looking to do here is broaden awareness and people's inform how well they're informed about this subject, so that we can change the narrative. And while we're doing this in parallel, like Larry was saying, there's the informing and educating from the political perspective of the initiative for the council members and state assembly to move the political aspect along, and has its own timeline marked off of schedules and dates and how politics works, and so it's very much informed by that process. So that's one. The other one is in wanting to engage with the community, and why we feel so strong about the opportunity in working in the various communities in Oakland, why we wanted to do Entheogen so that we're as inclusive as possible to bring everyone in, is that conversation, that educating of people of the community, that's a timeline that doesn't follow a calendar and a schedule like a political agenda or a political calendar for hearings and meetings and resolutions, because that's a conversation that's ongoing, forever evolving, and to really have it honestly, authentically, and in a way that's really engaging with communities, it needs to be long-term. We need to show a consistent presence so that, as I've heard it said, people only care about what you know when they know how much you care. So, by engaging, it's not simply having a booth at a festival and handing out flyers and thinking if we run out of all our flyers, we've done our job. Because, it's an ongoing process. When you're changing the narrative around something that people have held a certain idea or belief about for so long, wanting to shift their focus around that is something that takes, effort after effort and an ongoing conversation to really have that sink in and sit home.
And also that just real quick, we've also, this has been happening, this is the beauty of the Bay Area, the education's been happening for a really long time. And so we're not that far behind, and these things are happening and have been developing. And so even just within the last year, a lot of groups have been developing in Oakland. So that's already kind of taking place. So that's kind of helped us also to get to this initiative point, because this education was already going on throughout the different communities.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. I mean, partly I found that I just can no longer assume what people know or what people think about psychoactives in general? I mean, how far it's spread the interest, the sense that maybe this is something for people, maybe even for them. It's really hard to know. And then at the same time, aspects of the story that get lost in translation, and some of the hype, frankly, that we've seen, and some of the ways in which the medical industry starts to recognize hype and starts to carry it forward, and even well-meaning therapists and activists can get caught up in that kind of stuff too. So it's a really complex field, but it's also very dynamic, and it's clear that it's changing dramatically at a rate. I'm curious, Kufikiri, what part of the equation are you going to be looking at? Like, is there certain communities or aspects of this education process that you're kind of most charged by?
It's really about because I'm an Oakland native, because I was born and raised here, because I've seen the city go through so many challenges and so many different iterations, and just being someone that's also just a lay political student of my own. I know the struggles and the challenges that the various communities in Oakland have had to overcome and endure through for various reasons, whether it be political, economical, social, justice, reform. And so for me, coming home really in a way in a serendipitous time to be able to continue the engagement that I was raised with, learning the value of through my parents' legacy. For me, community engagement and activism and informing and really taking a strong role in being able to have these conversations to help shift the narrative so that those communities that may not initially see the benefit or see themselves in this initiative, because again, they may be carrying old language and false narratives around what psychoactive or psychedelic may mean, and that's not for them, but helping to shift that so that everyone's seeing that there's a role, there's a place, and not just beyond that, there's a need. Because really, for this to be successful, really for this to do what we really wanted to do, we need folks to see that their investment in it is not just something token, that we really need as well as want everyone involved in this. So having those conversations is something I'm excited about and looking forward to.
What do you think is the greatest need that these things can help fulfill? Like, what is I know there's multiple factors. There's addiction. There's depression. There's sense of alienation. There's all PTSD. There's different ways that things that these things are organized as healing. But what do you, just like on a gut level, feel is the real key, the real element that these things are necessary for, or can serve a need?
Yeah, all of this has unfolded from my own personal journey of healing, and thus having an experience shared with others of where having the experience of working with sacred plants has helped them gain an awareness on a personal, on a social, on some would say even a cosmic level, in being able to gain a power of choice in how they're moving their life forward from that moment, really aligning their intentions and their actions. And so when you're able to unplug from the programming that's so, on a constant metronome of the social dynamics around, labels and compartmentalizing communities and divide and conquer approaches, understanding where we're all connected, understanding that we have more in common than we don't, understanding that an individual's personal journey of healing will affect all those around them, and that change happens within one, it happens within a small cluster. So for one person's journey of healing, helps a family heal. A family's healing helps a community heal. A community's healing helps a city to heal. And so really, whether it's, beyond the numbers of how many people's lives, this is how we're rating success. And we can count all the people who say their lives, it's not that nuts and bolts in what this regards and relates to. So for me, that experience that everyone can benefit from, of gaining the power of choice over their own narrative and unplugging from the programming of how they're labeled and how they're defined and how they think they should see themselves, and the assumptions that we carry forward that keep us from building stronger communities, is something that's powerful and impactful, no matter where you are. There's just the unique character of Oakland that really fosters that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting. I'm really glad to hear you say that it's not simple, and it's not simply a matter of counting the people who say that they've been transformed, because, without sounding pessimistic, we still don't really know. We don't really know what it's like to suddenly have a lot of people who haven't had experience with these things enter into healing situations, and maybe they get temporary benefit. In the long run, it doesn't really help that much some people, and then some people actually have crazy experiences that become very difficult for them. And over time, we really just don't know what we're doing. But what I loved about what you're saying is that, while it's clear that these things are very helpful for significant numbers of people in the right circumstances. What's even in a way more important is that they kind of dissolve and stir up things that are stuck, stories that we're stuck with, social divides we're stuck with, and that even if there's a little bit of risk in there, that it still overall allows much more dynamics. And you talked about the sort of freedom of choice, meaning that there's more ways of seeing the situation. There's more ways of moving. So they're kind of like a catalyst rather than just simply a good medicine. Like, oh, this is good. This is going to go in and this is going to help you not be an addict anymore. And like, obviously in a lot of circumstances, that's true of something like ibogaine. Is that true of mushrooms? I don't. It's hard to say. Addiction's complicated. Blah blah blah. But we do know that by having these things, especially reframed, having these energies, these spirits, these plants as part of our open existence, decriminalized existence, that they're stirring up stuff, that they're allowing things to shift and change at a point where there's a lot going down.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that we're also really wanting to emphasize with this is the opportunity that it provides for new choices. Though that opportunity for new choices isn't the end all be all of itself, because people, as with any change of narrative, there's still the power of choice, and there's still that work that needs to be done in where the intentions and the actions need to align to really carry things forward. So that it's long lasting, and it's not, because we're not looking to make a magic pill that people are taking, for the rest of their lives to the newest happy pill. That's not what this is about. Some people are focus may be in that regard, and wanting to isolate certain things. But for us, again, taking a holistic approach, understanding that in the long view, the work that's there to align our intentions and our actions, to have the ongoing conversation, to show the benefits, to educate and almost re-educate the community in a certain regard, is really where the lasting effects and success will come from.
Yeah, that's really well said. I'm curious, Larry, what do you see as the biggest hurdle, or the whether it's a concept that's out in people's minds, or whether it's a particular local political forces, or what seems to be the where the pushback is coming from, if it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think Kufikiri is touching on a lot of the stuff about a major thing that in general is just this narrative. So, for example, like the cannabis narrative, if it's not medical, it's recreational. There's only two ways to do cannabis. There's no other ways, right? And so those types of narratives, like, okay, well, obviously with entheogens, there's a lot more ways than just recreational or medical. There's spiritual, there's educational, there's creativity. Same with cannabis. So that's one thing. Just like shifting these narratives is a big pushback. In general, I think with our communities, we've had a lot more openness than I think maybe we initially would have expected coming into this, where people are very open to hearing what we have to say, listening to sort of what we're bringing to the table. And, so that's been something that we haven't had a significant amount of pushback yet from. But surprisingly, we've had some interesting conversations just even within community, because there are, sort of the psilocybin only initiative and then the Decriminalize all drugs initiative. And so we're kind of like in this sweet spot, working only with entheogenic plants and fungi on Schedule 1. So we don't deal with Schedule 2, which is where poppy and coca are at. But there's actually been some interesting sort of push from people that are going the decrim all drugs route, and which was kind of a bit surprising, but it's exciting because it just speaks to the complexity of the conversation, the sophistication of the conversation, the varieties of ways to look at this. I think in general that some of the speakers, some of the elected officials that we're talking with said that we really want to engage with the local church communities, the Oakland Police Department. So those are conversations that are maybe going to be a little bit more challenging just because we haven't had that big pushback yet. And I'm assuming that there's maybe a little bit more education that might be needed there before people are open to hearing what we have to say. But I think, with the crew that we have here, we're really well prepared for those types of conversations. So it'll be really fascinating to see how those evolve.
Interesting in a way. This is a very, very urban endeavor. It's involves multiple communities, local politics. It's dense. It's looking towards ameliorating problems that are associated with the challenges of cities today, and yet it's also about nature. And I talked at the beginning of the conversation about how forward nature is in your presentation of this. You're not just treating these as substances that happen to be natural or as medicines that happen to grow from the ground. It's natural. It's part of nature, partly because of this community aspect you talk about. But there's also almost a kind of animism in your approach. Like there's something alive about the whole thing, a little bit magical maybe. Is that something you're kind of consciously conjuring, or that it feels like it's carrying the thing forward at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that we're all wizards and doing magical stuff here. No, of course, yeah. I think that's and I think nature is animistic. I think when you really, and most of us that have had these experiences and we connect with nature, we're much more liable to have that conversation with a tree or what have you, to really speak to nature in a different way. And so that probably speaks in a maybe an intentional and unintentional way, because that's just the heart and soul of what we're talking about here as our group. And so nature just kind of came to the forefront. And earlier you were saying something about nature versus being a little bit more hippy-dippy than, like, for example, psychedelics or entheogens would be. And I think that's actually interesting. We've had quite a few conversations and we've spent many hours debating and discussing all these different conversations. And one of the things that we actually had come to was that nature was actually taking us back in a different way. It wasn't really necessarily being hippy-dippy, but it's actually less threatening than would be, say, psychedelics. So we talk about nature and it forces the question. That's the thing. Right off the bat, we want someone to be like, what do they mean decriminalize nature? What does that even mean? And then it sort of forces people to think like, wait, why are we criminalizing nature? And so that in a way too, it is sort of a living, restoring our roots is our second tagline, bring it back to the roots, bring it back to our connection to our own lineages, our own communities, the plants that have been severed after millennia of colonization. So really trying to find a way to get back to nature, really connect with nature. And I think that in general, it's going to have an animistic feel, but I thank you for sort of sensing the magic in it, because I think we all feel that behind it.
Yeah, I mean, just hearing the watching the video from the rally was just the vibe that people were giving talks. It's interesting how it does really seem to draw people together, which is at a time when there's a lot of stress between groups, and so there's not a lot of obvious glue, and it ain't going to be social media, I'll tell you that. Yeah. So It's really wonderful to see the kind of work you're doing there. We just got a minute left, so what's like happening now? What can people do? People are excited to hear this. Like, oh, this is awesome. There's always the "what can I do" question. So what can folks do to support it?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, we're going to be doing this educational campaign. So contact us on decriminalizenature.org or info@decriminalizenature.org. And we can, find places for people to do volunteer work, education, obviously fundraising. This is a proposal that we're all putting a lot of effort into and time into, but it is costing money as well. So any kind of fundraising, anyone that has any connections to that would be great. And then just in general, coming together in community and, if you live in Oakland, I think one thing you can do is, call your elected officials, call the people that are the council members of your district, write them letters, handwritten letters, those types of things. And that will sort of speak to the larger community as well. So it's not just us sharing with them, but now all of a sudden constituents in each district are also kind of coming together and talking about this conversation with the council members.
Great. That sounds wonderful. Kufikiri, you want to add any words?
Just to that effort, it's the educational narrative is a two-way conversation, and so it's not about us talking to the communities. It's about us wanting to engage and speak with the communities. So the more voices we have in that conversation where people can share their story, again, and changing that narrative so that we're not following the old lines of stigma, and it's being normalized as something that, again, is already owned by people that they're reclaiming in a way. And in that regard, inviting everyone to speak up and speak out on the issue in both the political sphere as well as amongst friends and family that may also carry those that pushback and false beliefs is a great opportunity wherever you have the chance to do so. Excellent. All right, Larry Norris and Kufikiri, thanks so much for joining me on Expanding Mind.
Thank you very much, Erik.
Thank you for having us.
Excellent. So it's decriminalizenature.org. Check it out. And until next week, keep your minds open.